So here's a question to kick us off. Are we just children wrapped up in adult skin? It sounds, I don't know, almost like a cliche, maybe, but it's actually the really provocative idea at the heart of the source material we're diving into today.
It really is. These excerpts titled The Shell, The Child, and the Return, they get into this idea that what we call adulthood,
Hmm.
well, it might be fundamentally unnatural.
Unnatural, that's a strong word. So it's exploring that gap, that distance between our sort of spontaneous, authentic self when we start out
Yeah.
and the conditioned person we become, the performer.
Exactly. It's a really essential deep dive for you looking at that gap. The sources suggest that time,
Hmm.
it doesn't necessarily mean real psychological growth, it just adds layers.
Yeah.
Protection.
Layers of protection. Okay, let's unpack this then. Our mission today is really to dissect this concept of the two within. You've got the essential child and then this hardened
An
shell.
exhausting shell, often.
Right. And we need to figure out why so many different wisdom traditions, across the board seem to point back towards innocence. Why is that the goal, not more complexity? Is maturity really an evolution or is it more like a burden?
Well, we probably have to start with that core conflict the sources lay out. The idea is the moment we shift from child to adult, we learn things like posture, tone, caution.
Yeah. Learn the rules.
We learn the rules.
Yeah.
And that layer, what they call the shell of maturity, composure, and caution, it's meant to shield us,
Yeah.
right, from the world being harsh. But the argument is it ends up being a kind of cage.
A cage. And I think one of the most powerful points the sources make is linking that shell directly to, well, a lot of modern distress. You hear constantly about anxiety, depression, exhaustion.
Oh, absolutely.
And the material says, look, a lot of this comes from living in this compressed, unnatural state. But how? How does this armor actually cause that compression?
It's the repression, isn't it? Repression of just spontaneous life. We were adulthood like armor. Okay, it stops you getting hurt maybe. But it also stops you moving. And the sources really emphasize that inside that armor, there's huge pressure, sorrow even, because we've pushed down the very energy that makes us dynamic. I mean, think about how adults physically hold themselves back,
Yeah, like being hesitant to just run across a park or dance if music comes on
or even just letting emotion show plainly on your face.
Yeah.
There's that automatic self-correction. That's the shell in action.
Okay, but let me push back slightly here. If the child is all curiosity and openness, doesn't avoiding the shell entirely mean, well, avoiding necessary responsibility?
Hmm.
Does the source material talk about that line between just living spontaneously and, basic caution?
It does, yeah, quite clearly, actually. The argument isn't that the child is ignorant. It's that they're experientially curious. The mistake the shell makes is thinking caution has to replace curiosity.
Instead of guiding it.
Exactly. Instead of guiding it, the child, they say, lives in why, not just what is. They don't just read the warning sign and stop. They kind of poke around the edges. They touch the flame, maybe, to learn the truth for themselves.
That's a really key difference, isn't it? Learning through direct experience versus just accepting what you're told.
Right. And the sources argue that conditioning really takes hold when we start living only by what society or parents or schools tell us is true, instead of trusting our own experience. And that's when the spontaneous joy, the innocence, starts to harden into that shell.
That hardening, that psychological shell, it connects directly to this really powerful metaphor the sources use, the tree of life.
Oh, yeah, that's a great visual.
It is. So if the shell protects the individual, maybe the relentless chase for knowledge, for specialization, protects us from uncertainty. And that's where this tree analogy comes in.
It's a really brilliant way to picture how our search for more and more specific knowledge can kind of paradoxically lead us away from wisdom, from connection.
So picture humanity as this tree, right? We're rooted down in our beginnings, the soil, the source, whatever you want to call it. And then we grow outwards. We spend our lives climbing up, gathering knowledge, getting titles.
Associates, bachelors, masters, doctorate.
Exactly, each one a step further out on a branch.
And there's this line in the text that really hits home. The further out on those branches we climb, the more specialized we get, yes, but also the more separate. You might become the world's leading expert on one single leaf.
But you've lost touch with the trunk.
You've drifted further from the roots, from the simple, unified truth, back at the center.
Okay, so the big insight here is that real wisdom isn't found by climbing further out, but getting even more specialized. We mistake complexity for depth.
Precisely. The sources are arguing that wisdom is actually the journey back. It's returning inward, down the trunk, back towards the roots, back to the simplicity of that child within. The highest wisdom isn't another degree. It's understanding that it's all connected back at the source.
And what's really striking is how universal this idea turns out to be. It's not just one philosopher tucked away somewhere. This theme of shedding complexity, returning to innocence, it pops up everywhere.
It really does. Across so many different traditions, it suggests this is a fundamental human, maybe longing or drive.
Like what? What examples do the sources give?
Well, they connect some really powerful dots. Take Hinduism, for example. You look at the journey of Krishna through his 9 incarnations. It culminates in the highest self. And what's this highest self doing?
Playing.
Playing. Dancing, playing the flute, embodying Leela, this idea of divine play. Spontaneous, not serious. Childlike, really.
Wow. Okay. And then you contrast that maybe with Christianity.
Well, the sources point straight to Matthew 18. It's incredibly direct. Unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven.
No room for interpretation there.
Not really. It puts that childlike state, the innocence, the humility right at the center. It's the prerequisite for, ultimate understanding or reconciliation.
But the sources also bring in the Gnostic Gospels, right? To add maybe a deeper intellectual layer.
Yes, exactly. Texts like the Gospel of Thomas or Philip, they talk about returning to a state of wholeness that existed before division, before conditioning, before shame. That's the crucial bit.
Wholeness before division. What does that actually mean, though, intellectually?
It suggests a state before dualistic thinking took over. That framework we use to chop everything up, right, wrong, good, devil, us, them.
Mm-hmm.
The Gnostic view seems to be that the child represents the soul before it got broken up by these categories, before we learned judgment and fear.
So adulthood, in that view, is just the accumulation of all those internal divisions we've learned.
That seems to be the implication, yeah.
Okay, so if that's the state of being, how does it look in action? How does that wholeness manifest?
Well, the sources connect it beautifully to the Taoist masters. Lao Tzu famously described the true sage as being like a wise child. It's about being in total non-resistant harmony with the way things are, flowing.
Which sounds a lot like Bruce Lee.
Exactly. Be like water. It's become almost a catchphrase. But the sources remind us it's not just about fighting. It's a way of living without the shell.
Also.
Water just flows, doesn't fight obstacles, it finds a way around or through. It doesn't cling to one shape. It adapts.
That adaptability,
Yeah.
That's the perfect parallel to the child's state, isn't it? The shell is brittle because it's rigid.
But the child is resilient because they're fluid. They bend, they don't break as easily.
The sources use that great example of a child learning to walk.
Oh, that's powerful. Yeah. They fall down, 100 times more?
Easily. And an adult wearing that shell might see the first fall or the 10th fall as failure. Proof of inadequacy, it triggers shame, maybe even giving up.
But the child, they don't know failure in that sense. They certainly don't know shame about it. There's just flow. There's the urge to get up and try again. It's completely natural.
Which suggests shame isn't innate. It's learned. It's part of the shell we build.
A core component, the sources argue. That distinction, flow versus shame, really feels like the key difference between the natural state and the unnatural one we adopt.
Okay, this brings up a huge question then. If the whole point is to get back to that state of innocence and flow, how does this connect to probably the most famous story about losing innocence? The Garden of Eden story.
The sources tackle that head on. They basically position the Eden story as the origin myth for the adult shell.
Really? How?
Think about it. In the garden, Adam and Eve are portrayed as children. Innocent, unashamed, whole. They're living in that state of spontaneous flow, no need for judgment.
Until the tree of knowledge.
Precisely. Eating from that tree brought judgment. The knowledge of good and evil, right and wrong.
Duality.
And immediately, separation enters the picture. Guilt. Fear. They become self-conscious adults, and they cover themselves. The shell appears the moment they internalize the ability to judge themselves and reality in this divided way.
Wow. So the whole spiritual journey, or psychological journey, depending on how you look at it, it's about getting back to that state before the judgment, before the shell.
That's the core argument. It's about reconciling the two within us. Realizing the adult is the mask, maybe a necessary one sometimes for navigating society.
But the child is the essence, the core we need for our soul, for genuine living.
Because the child just is. They aren't constantly comparing what is to what should be. They don't divide the world up into categories of worthiness or blame.
There's no internal critic running commentary.
Exactly. And so the sources conclude that the highest wisdom isn't about knowing more, accumulating more information on the branches. It's about unknowing.
unknowing.
Yeah, letting go of the rigid categories, the judgments, the shell, returning to that pure, fluid, unguarded state we started with, becoming like water again.
When you put it all together like that, the consistency across these different figures is pretty amazing. Jesus, Lao Tzu, Krishna, even Bruce Lee in his own way.
They're all pointing towards the same fundamental truth, aren't they? That real wisdom lies in simplicity, in surrender, in that childlike presence, not in piling up more complexity or control.
Yeah.
And the final synthesis the source material offers is really quite profound. It suggests the journey leads to recognizing that ultimately there aren't really two within us, the adult and the child. There's only the child. And that essential, spontaneous, unjudging child, that's everything.
That definitely gives us a lot to think about from this deep dive. We've seen how that drive towards what we call maturity can actually risk cutting us off from our core.
Specialization leading to separation.
Right, and how across so many different spiritual and philosophical paths, the real goal seems to be defined by this spontaneous, unjudging innocence. Flow. The source material leaves us with this image. Living in that recovered state means seeing, say, an old man and a newborn baby as equals. Even seeing a dog as angelic.
Because the judgment is gone. The categories dissolve.
Which unlocks the divine in the everyday. So the question for you, listening, is maybe, what stands out to you about this difference between being curious, truly experientially curious, versus being conditioned? And perhaps, what small piece of that protective but maybe limiting shell, what small piece might you be willing to let go of, even just starting today,